Alrighty, so while we're waiting to see if anybody else is going to weigh in on the poll, let's go ahead and get started. And I'm going to start us off today with a collect for All Saints Day, which is one of the ones I really love. I think it's a beautiful collect. So let us pray. Almighty God, you have knit together your elect in one communion and fellowship in the mystical body of your Son, Christ our Lord. Give us grace so to follow your blessed saints in all virtuous and godly living, that we may come to those ineffable joys that you have prepared for those who truly love you. Through Jesus Christ our Lord, who with you and the Holy Spirit lives and reigns, one God in glory everlasting. Amen. Well, it's great to see you tonight. I am with you today from North Carolina. Actually, I'm visiting some friends. So if you notice that my background looks a little bit different than it was before, that's the reason why. And there could be, a small person running through here at any given moment. So might be a little bit of extra energy for our meeting tonight. So let's go ahead and stop the polling at this point in time and go ahead and take a look at our results. Question number one, what type of audit do you typically have performed? We've got 2 who do third-party CPA audits, 5 who do congregational committee audits, and 1 with an assisted congregational committee audit. Which is very typical, I think, for what I understand about our congregations and how most of them typically get their audits done. And when we were on the call this morning, I also stopped here for a moment just to ask, does everybody on the meeting here tonight, do you know what a committee audit is? And you can, if you don't, just shake your head or, Okay, so we do have a couple folks who aren't familiar with a committee audit. So, congregational committee audit is what happens when you get 2 or 3 folks from your congregation together to actually audit your books. And so, when the committee that's formed to do that obviously can't be anybody who is either involved in the record keeping itself. Or has decision-making authority over what happens with the money. That would be a conflict of interest. Although in some cases, if you have people who have, let's just say you have somebody who's a counter, who would be interested in participating on a congregational committee audit, you could have them do that. They just can't audit the cash receipts because they actually take part in keeping those records. So they could be on your committee. They just you have to be careful about what you allow them to audit. That's, basically you get the audit committee together and they go through the checklists, and I'll go through some of the checklists that we have on the website too. I'll show you where those are. And again, there's a considerable majority of our congregations who do choose to audit this way, because obviously it's very cost effective in order to be able to do that. An assisted congregational committee audit is what happens when you get that congregational committee together, but you also bring someone in from the outside who has, financial or accounting expertise. And the way that helps is that sometimes, when you ask people or you want to try to ask people to help participate in an audit, they're very reluctant to do so because they either, first of all, they think of it as this big, horrendous job and nobody wants to do that, and a lot of people, if they don't have any kind of expertise or experience with auditing, they just feel as though they're completely unqualified to do, what you're asking them to do. But if you have someone who comes in from the outside and assists your committee with the audit, then that person is the one who's literally just directing the rest of the group in their specific jobs about what they need to do. And a lot of times that can help you with your recruiting on an audit committee, because then they know that they're going to be led by someone. And typically, again, the assisted committee audits that I've actually been the outside person who came in and helped, we've done them in, maybe half a day. or sometimes maybe 6 hours tops, but that didn't mean everybody had to be there for 6 hours. So it's basically, rather than having people think if they're on an audit committee, that it's going to be this like weeks long job or months long job of trying to get the audit done. If you can have an someone come in to assist with the expertise, and they realize it's going to be a quick job, then that can also, help. And on an audit committee, I guess the last thing I would say there is that you do not have to have people who have, really any degree of financial expertise at all, because a lot of what for an audit, if you have one person, I guess I should say, to be really clear, if you have one person who has that accounting expertise, whether it's somebody from the outside or if you're fortunate enough to have someone in your congregation who isn't a part of your financial record keeping or having authority to spend money, like the vestry members can't be on the audit committee. But if you have somebody in your own church with that kind of expertise, then the rest of the people who are on the committee just really need to be ready to do the kind of testing of records that doesn't require financial expertise. Basically, they just need to be able to, they need to be, conscientious and trustworthy people who know how to do what someone tells them to do as far as looking into the records. So that's sort of a little bit of a quick and dirty on committee audits and assisted committee audits. And then obviously third-party CPA, I think everybody's pretty familiar with what that's all about. And then so within our group here tonight, we've got, hang on a second. We need to get back to, so we've got 2 folks who are already done their audit. 3 who are going to be looking forward to doing that in the next 3 months or so, another one within the next 6 months, and then a couple who are just not sure when that's going to happen yet. And again, that was pretty similar to what we found this morning in our group. And then what type of accounting system do you use? We've got 4 who use electronic spreadsheets, 1 with on-site computer automated, and then 3 with online automated. And so, again, fairly similar to what we found this morning. And you'll see as we go through, some of the information here that when we're talking about how to do auditing in a virtual environment, the kind of the way that you, keep your records is going to have an impact on how you can, get through the audit, either, completely virtually, or in some cases with a minimum of on-site work that needs to happen. It's really good that we don't have anybody with completely manual records, because again, it just makes it more complicated. The more that you can't literally share electronically, obviously, the harder it is, to try to get through an audit. So before I so before I move any further, is there anything about what I was just describing with, committee audits or anything like that anybody has any questions about?
Hey, Phyllis, this is Wendy.
Hey, Wendy.
Of course, the phone wouldn't stop ringing, so I missed the first part of when you introduced it, and I'm kind of interested in that. So do you mind repeating the first part of what you said about starting an audit or whatever?
When I was talking about the committee audits?
Yes.
Yeah, so what I was talking about, I just wanted to make sure that we have a couple of folks who weren't familiar with what a committee audit is. And so I was just sharing that it's really just getting 2 or 3 people together from your congregation who can help perform the audit, help you do the testing, and do the work that is involved in actually accomplishing the audit, doing the internal control procedures, things like that. And what I was saying is that if it's, sometimes it's easier if you're getting started to try to find somebody with experience. If you don't have someone in your own congregation who could serve on an audit committee who has accounting experience, to bring someone in from the outside to help your committee to do that. Because one of the things I heard this morning is that congregations oftentimes have a difficult time recruiting people to be on an audit committee. It's not something that everybody's chomping at the bit to do. And
I would be.
and largely it's because, first of all, people think it's a humongous job, and it really doesn't have to be a humongous job. And if you have somebody with the expertise to be able to lead you through it, then it goes even more quickly. And to be able to have someone who can help divide up the work is also very helpful. So that's kind of what we were, in a nutshell, sort of what we were going through.
Okay. So one question.
Mm-hmm.
So like the treasurer should not be part of the audit committee.
Absolutely not. No. But the treasurer can be one of the ones who is the most helpful in getting the records together that need to be audited, because obviously the treasurer is the one who's handling those records all the time. But anybody who is either involved with the record keeping or has authority to spend the money, like anybody on the vestry, because they have decision making, they have decision making authority over how the money gets spent, that would be a conflict of interest.
Okay.
And so they wouldn't be able to serve on your audit committee. I have a kind of a running joke at St. Matthew's, where I go to church, that I've stayed off the vestry for pretty much all the time I've been at St. Matthew's, because they need somebody for the audit committee, so if I'm on the audit committee, I can't be on the vestry.
Right.
So that's how that goes. But I did mention before, if you have somebody like for example, somebody who counts money, who would be willing to serve on the audit committee, they can serve on the audit committee. They just can't audit the cash receipts because they're involved with that. So they could help audit other things like payroll, or, take a look at some of the other, items that are on the checklist that need to be dealt with. So it's, so there are ways to work around that. And
so it shouldn't be done by, like, if you have an outside person to do it, it shouldn't be done by that outside person alone.
Well, that would almost be the same as doing sort of a third party, CPA audit. That was one of the other choices that was on my little poll there.
So that's the committee, and then 2 would be the CPA audit.
So there were 3 choices. There's doing a congregational committee, which is only your own congregational committee. So if you have somebody in your own congregation who has that kind of accounting expertise, and isn't on the vestry, and isn't the treasurer or anybody, So if you have somebody like that, you could just form your own committee without anybody from the outside.
Right. Okay.
But if you don't have anybody with that kind of accounting expertise, it often helps to recruit people to an audit committee if you have someone, if you bring in someone from the outside with that kind of expertise.
Okay.
One of the things that we were talking about this morning also is that kind of a person with the accounting expertise can also divide up the jobs so that,
I heard that part where you said,
right. So that when you're then, thinking about who you want, if, getting people to help you on your audit committee, then you're able to literally say to somebody, I need you to come, on, one day for about 2 hours and help us go through the cash disbursements. And maybe you say to another person, I need you to come for, 2 hours on, maybe it's another day, and help us go through the cash receipts. And this is all if you can't do it virtually. But if you divide up the jobs, so you're giving people a very specific, very concrete, discrete thing to do, then it's a lot less scary than saying, oh, could you serve on the audit committee? And everybody, again, like I said, they have this idea in their head that it's this huge, incomprehensible job. And so nobody steps up to do anything, so a lot of times you can get better results in your recruiting if you have somebody help you design, what you're going to be asking people to do. So that works.
So I have the 3 now: the committee audit, the CPA audit, and the congregation audit.
Yeah. What they are is the committee audit, what I call an assisted committee audit, which is where you bring the outside person in to help your committee. So committee audit is 1, the assisted committee audit is 2, and the third party CPA audit is number 3.
Right. Okay. Congregation audit.
Okay.
Congregational audit is somebody with that experience that will guide the
Right.
people you select from the congregation. Okay,
Mhm.
got it.
All right. And I saw that Lou Cavalieri posted in the in our chat space, speaking from experience, the only safe audit is a third-party CPA audit. That is definitely the most, the most rigorous. And it's also, it is also, I guess, what you would call probably the most safe, the most sort of conservative audit that you can have done. Because again, you have somebody who's a completely disinterested third party. And when you actually have a CPA audit done, the CPA has many, many, many more checklists that they have to go through than you would encounter in what your own committee is doing. I would also say, though, from my own personal experience, that we have a couple of accounting firms that we use to do assisted committee audits. Okay. And so when they come in as outside people to do assisted committee audits, the ones that I've had the experience of, I actually almost prefer them to just a flat third-party CPA audit, because you have a CPA who's still using that same level of, sort of checklists, but they're not doing, what they call a full-blown audit. It's called an agreed-upon procedures engagement. So they have a very specific set of checklists that they use, that they tailor to our churches. And so what they end up doing is testing things like the ones that I work with. They're more familiar with churches. And if you do a third-party CPA audit with a firm that's not really familiar with how church books work, they're not going to check and say, oh, did you match this to your parochial report? Because the third-party CPA isn't even going to know what a parochial report is. And they're not going to check to see, oh, did you match this to your clergy compensation schedule to make sure, that you're up to the minimum, your diocesan minimums on clergy compensation. Because again, they're not going to have any idea that we do that, but the CPAs that we've been using it in order to help with the assisted committee audits, they are familiar with those things. So they're going to ask you, and they're going to check and see, and they're going to say, oh, are you, what if they take a look at your insurance, and, they're going to ask if you're with church insurance, and some of those things that are peculiar, to our own denomination.
Right.
So, and
Also,
then,
we use at Christ Church, we use the assistant committee audit for several years, and it's a little cheaper than the full CPA, but the person leading the audit is a CPA, so they could also provide advice, like you say, around church things that are needed. But we enlist people from the parish to do sort of the test and all, so that's where it saves money. The people going through the records and everything aren't from the CPA's firm, which would have increased our costs significantly if we were using them to review all the records. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think who did do a third-party CPA audit? If you could just unmute yourself and talk about that a little bit.
Ann Neff, St. John's, Salem. We have a CPA firm. We use an accounting firm because the church is heavily endowed for our monthly bill paying. And so that as a treasurer, I basically tell the accountant what bills to pay and what lines to put them in to and he has the spreadsheet. And then we have another company come in that does the audit. And we've been using the same company for at least 5 years, as long as I've been the treasurer. And they know churches, they know how we operate. They'll look for things that they picked up the previous year to see if, like, for example, we needed a better credit card usage, who got a credit card, where the credit cards were stored, how things were billed. And so he was watching our procedures as well as the actual. They bring in we have one person dedicated who manages it, and then there are two other people The secretary and I are available if they need explanation or additional documentation. They go up in the library with all the stuff, and they're there for a couple days, and they work on, as you just said before, Phyllis, we sign an agreement with them in terms of what they're going to do.
Mm-hmm. And do they bill you separately for the audit work?
Well, that's all they do. That firm just does the audit.
Just does the
Yeah.
audit.
Yeah.
Okay. So then, and would you mind sharing with us for that audit, how much they charge you?
I'm going to have to look that up.
Oh,
I don't know.
okay. And I was wondering also, Jonathan, you use Lisa, right?
Yes.
And would you mind sharing with us, because there is a question that we got in the chat box, how much does an outside firm charge for?
Yeah.
And
The last time we used her, was about 3,000.
yeah, that's
we used
what
her for several years. Then she became our assistant, our bookkeeper, so we couldn't use her anymore.
Yes, that would definitely be a
now-
conflict of interest.
Now I'm planning to go back to use her because it did give you that mix between a third party CPA and using committee audit, and the fact that she knows the Episcopal Church well. You're right. All the things around a PROCA report, even advised us when we're eligible for certain deductions or credits. She could bring that to our attention so that we could take care of those along the way.
Yeah. And then,
yeah, it was the middle. I mean, years ago they had a third party CPA, then they had the full committee, but it became the real balance because we found doing internal committee audit, it's still a little intimidating if the people aren't used to doing audits of churches. I mean, even our members that might have some financial background, they'd never done any church audit, so they had more challenges than we did bringing in the assistant committee audit.
Yep. And then do you remember, and I know this was probably a while back, but I'll ask you anyway, when you were doing the full-blown third-party CPA audit, how much you were charged?
No, I don't. Yeah. Unfortunately, that was before I came on as treasurer, so I'd have to look that up through some old. But it was when we had a capital campaign and we had some external funding. That's when we had brought that firm on. But it was significantly more than what we paid with the assistant committee audit. I remember that.
Yeah, my experience has been the full-blown CPA audit would be probably a minimum of 2 to 3 times the price that you just quoted. For the assisted committee audit, usually some of the least expensive CPA audits I've heard of have been about $6,000. So how about you, Lou? I know that you just had one done. Would you mind sharing with us how much it cost?
Yeah, I sure would. I think that a full-blown CPA audit for us cost about $4,000.
Oh, wow. You got a great deal.
I've had it done. Well, I've had it done by another. I'm on the board of a private foundation in Philadelphia, and the Chapel of Four Chaplains, and we use an outside auditor there as well. It's a little bit different there because for a private foundation in the state of Pennsylvania, you have to have an outside auditor.
Absolutely.
And they charge us $4,500. So if Lisa is only charging, you said $3,000.
Can I put this in?
Yeah, and that's actually
I'll put it in there.
there are some of the ones that she's done where it's been 2,500, but 3,000 is
Yeah, that started out before we went to we were just using QuickBooks, and then we went to ACS Realm, and therefore it was cheaper using that because it was a system that had a lot of the features built in for churches. So it went down a little bit after that, but we started out just using QuickBooks. And it was 3,000 the first time she started working with us.
But that's a great price, Lou. That
Yeah, it was, and it was worth every penny, as you know, Phyllis. You know what happened. And also, I would also say that if you can use Lisa, I mean, if Lisa does that, I'd be interested in speaking with her for next year.
Yeah, she does. She does that, and then we also have another firm, Audrey Sherrick from Friedman LLP. They have offices all over the state, actually, and she also does the assisted committee audits, and I think her pricing is similar to Lisa's. They're both very good, and really helpful.
So you have a list of people who can do audits.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, those
Okay.
are the two. Yeah. Those are the two that I'm really aware of. And again, that have done them for our congregations, and the reviews that have come back from our congregations have been good. So, they're the ones that I'm aware of that I feel confident in recommending. I think that, there's a lot of CPA firms, who could do, again, what they call that kind of an audit is a agreed upon procedures engagement, where they're not necessarily doing everything that that a full audit would require. And I don't know, Jonathan, with you, when Lisa does yours, she's not doing, like, you're not getting a report that says that your records were audited according to GAAP, right? Is she doing a review for you?
No, I'd have to look for sure, but I think it's the gap. I mean, we get like a 3-inch binder from her
Right.
with all the details and recommendations. But what she
Uh-huh.
does do is audit against the Parochial report. She goes
Right.
through and verifies that the expenses are properly recorded on a Parochial report.
Mm-hmm.
Things.
Yeah.
I mean, we're on a cash-based system, but I'm not sure it's the detail, like you say, that you would have all the checklists with that. Now, she does have a list of checklists she goes through
Right.
every year prior to making sure these are all the things we provide her with, the right documentation, minutes of the vestry.
Mm-hmm.
All those things are part of the process.
Mm-hmm. And I also note that, I'll get to you in just a second, Ann, that James had posted in the chat also that an outside CPA must have somebody available to go through the records and explain them. And that's pretty much true. That's pretty much, that's where your treasurer comes in, really, really handy is to be that person who's actually leading, whether it's your committee through the records, or whether it's a third party auditor, especially if it's an outside CPA, so that they can, then, and especially in areas like parochial reports and clergy compensation, sometimes outside CPA firms, if they're new to you, especially if they're new to churches, do need to have a little bit more explanation. And he says it's also a good idea for somebody to review the CPA audit before it's finalized. And as far as I understand it, I think that's pretty much, or should be, standard operating procedure with any auditing firm, any third party, outside CPA, is that once they get through the actual audit of your records and they are preparing their report with your financial statements, they should be reviewing that with you, whether it's your treasurer, or if you have an audit committee. And when I say audit committee from a church, if you have a committee that you've put together to oversee the audit, even, oversee the management of the audit, even though it's being done by an outside firm, or maybe it's to your vestry, that outside firm needs to report back using a draft report and explain that to you very thoroughly. That should be part of their engagement with you, to come in and explain that draft report thoroughly before it's finalized. And then once they explain it and you have the opportunity to ask your questions, and get your, whatever confusion or issues you might have, satisfied and dealt with, that's when they finalize the report. So yes, absolutely. It's a good idea for, again, whether it's your treasurer or whether you just ask that CPA firm to come and present their report to your vestry, because a lot of times there, again, it's not even necessarily just about the financial statements themselves. One of the things I think, we're all familiar with is internal controls, and that's part of what an audit is about. And oftentimes, either just as important or even more important than the numbers themselves is they will form an opinion on the internal controls being used, and they'll make recommendations where they see weaknesses. And so that in particular should be reported to your vestry by the firm that's doing the audit. And so again, your vestry has an opportunity to weigh in and talk about some of the issues that may have been found. And, again, just to kind of get through that stigma, of, oh my gosh, what happens if we have issues? Well, the best thing we can do is just identify the issues that are there and look at it forward looking, so that we, if you've got issues with your internal controls, if you're not having the proper, like two unrelated people counting after the Sunday services, and that gets pointed out as an issue of internal control, that's so that you can fix it in the future, and so that those things are in place to protect you, to protect the congregation. And so it's just as much about that as it is the accuracy of the numbers themselves. That's part of the reason why that's so important. So Anne, yeah, go ahead if you want to unmute yourself.
Just to your recent point, our Ford Scott is who we use. They just said that they needed somebody at the church to be appointed with some accounting background to review their final report before the final. The biggest problem that I have is I can't get anybody else interested in it. It's like, okay, you take care of it. So, but Ford Scott would accept me as the reviewer person, so that they just don't have the feeling they write the report and nobody looks at it or implements part of it or even understands it. Okay, so I'm looking at our 2019 transaction report, and the audit we paid for in that year was the 2017, and that was $3,300, and it was to Ford Scott.
Well, that's a really good deal. Like
considering how long they're here, yes.
Yeah. And, there again, I mean, one of the things that I would say is that if you wouldn't, if you've been happy with them and you think that our congregations can have those, that sort of a similar pricing to what to what you're talking about, or if they would like to be included on our list of people that we recommend, I would be happy to add them to that list. And because again, I'm used to getting, people coming back and saying, oh, well, I got quoted $10,000 to get my audit done, and I can't afford that much. And I mean, $3,300 is almost in the same ballpark as what Lisa's doing. So that would be really helpful in order to have that done. And, I would say the same thing to you, Lou, with, the firm that you just used. If they would like to be put on our list, and you've had good experience with them, then I would be happy to put them on the list for other people to have as well.
Their name is St. Clair, so we couldn't go wrong. Plus, also, they are in the community in Merchantville, and they support our food kitchen.
Oh, that's great.
We have a very good relationship with them.
Yep. Well, we've got, again, lots of churches that aren't very far away from where you are. So that could be very helpful to, especially to some of those churches down there to help, help them get their audits done. So the next thing that I wanted to do is I just wanted to, again, when we're talking about how to do audits in a in a virtual environment, that we're in, the things that that we really kind of need to take into consideration are, starting from the components of the audit, how that, let's see, there we go. How we would get that accomplished, when it used to be, whether it's committee audits, whether it's, third-party CPAs, whatever, that, you just kind of get used to having this sort of group sort of descend on you and kind of take over your accounting records for, however long it takes to get that accomplished, whether it's a day, a couple of days, maybe a couple of days spread out over time. And now that it's a little bit more difficult for us to really gather physically to be able to do that in a safe way, there are a number of different options that we have, but a lot of it may depend upon what kind of accounting system and record keeping system you're using. Obviously, if you have a manual system, then everything is paper centered. And the only way that you can get away from having to spend so much time, sort of together in one place, is if you have someone who's in charge of trying to, perhaps scan some of those records, to be able to send them to people so that they would be able to accomplish the checks that have to happen without having to be exactly, there where the papers are. And obviously, the more that we can do electronically when we're not having to handle paper, it just, it's just that much, it's one step safer as far as transmitting germs and things like that. So, where we have automated records from an on-site computer, that's sort of a next step of being able to at least generate reports that can be, fairly easily sent to other people to be able to take a look at without, again, having to gather in a room, without having to pass paper around, those kinds of things. And then obviously, if you're automated and you have an online system, like ACS Realm or QuickBooks has an online version, then it's really easy to share reports and records that are kept online, because the person that you need to share them with just needs access to the system. And, pretty much any system, whether it's ACS Realm, QuickBooks, they have different levels of user authority. So if you allow someone access to an online system, that doesn't mean, that you have to allow them access that gives them the ability to change anything. You don't want to do that in a lot of cases, but having them have access to it so that they can read reports, or they can access records, but not be able to have what they call editing authority, or, the ability to change anything, can be a much easier way to be able to take care of that. So, I was just, again, kind of going into the accounting reports and the financial statements themselves. One of the things that I just kind of wanted to share with you, because I am aware that we have folks on the call with differing levels of understanding about audits, why we do them, what we're actually trying to accomplish when we're doing the audit, is, a lot of people get, really, everybody understands the part about audits that means you have to go back through the records, and you're like looking to prove that transactions are posted in the right place. So you have to go pull the records. It's also for, the sake of internal controls. But, one of the things that I find is often very misunderstood is that the purpose of the audit really is to validate the financial statements that are being presented to your vestry. It's not just about, making a list and going through and testing everything. You have to ask yourself, why are you testing these things? The reason that you're testing these things is that you're supposed to be starting from a set of financial statements. You are auditing those financial statements. So typically they're the same, financial statements that show up in your annual report that you're giving to your congregation every year. So you've got a balance sheet, you've got a statement of revenues and expenses. In many, overwhelming majority of cases, you've got a budget versus actual comparison that you're doing, which is essentially, your revenue and expense statement, but compared against your budget. So you have that added level of information there. So it's those statements, that you are verifying the integrity of. So that's the reason why you go back and you choose certain, at random, you choose certain transactions, so that when you test them and you find out that, that they're that they are being processed correctly all through the system, and they're being posted in the right place, what you're doing is you're giving that added level of trust in the numbers that are showing up in those reports. So your vestry can trust them. The people who are reading your annual reports can trust them because all of the things are in place from the time you have a document come in, we talk about documents of original entry, for cash receipts, cash disbursements, payroll. They all have different types of documents of original entry. Cash receipts, a lot of times the one that we focus on the most, obviously, is your count sheets. From your weekly counts, because that's where, a significant amount of the money that's coming in that's being tracked is. Or perhaps you have, perhaps you have a tenant in your building, so they get billed every month for their rent, or they have an arrangement, some kind of a, arrangement with you for their rent to come in, so that when that it enters into your accounting system, there's some kind of a document, whether it's just the check from the tenant, or, if you actually invoice your tenant, but that's where these original documents come in. cash disbursements, the bills that you get that you pay. So whether it's a utility bill or you've got you went down to the Office Max and you bought office supplies, and you have the receipt from when you bought the office supplies. It's these documents that come in from the start that trigger, your accounting system. And so it's, taking it from the time that document comes in all the way to the time that you have a number that gets posted in your financial statements and making sure that everything is done correctly. And so when that document comes in, if it's, I'm just going to take cash disbursements now for an example. When that document comes in, what's the approval process that's used for that bill in order to get that bill approved to be paid, and that could vary depending upon what type of bill it is you're looking at. If you're looking at some kind of a materials purchase, if it was over a certain amount, do you have a policy that says that it needs to get, 2 people to approve it before it can be paid? And if that is your policy, was that policy followed? That's what you're tracking through. So that's an example of how you're tracking the integrity of your internal controls. And then also what you're doing is you're checking to see, okay, so now you had the bill come in, it got approved by the people it needed to get approved by. So then when it went to be paid, was that a different person who actually paid it than the person who approved it? And then when that person paid it, did it get charged to the correct account in your financial record keeping system? So that you can then say that, if all of those things happened and they were all done correctly, then for a fact that that transaction was properly reflected in your financial statements and that all your internal controls were in place to make sure that it really was a legit expense, and even in the first place. And then, same thing with your cash receipts. If you're looking at your count sheets, from the time that the money hits, the envelopes hit the collection plate or the money is coming in, hopefully you're getting a lot more online giving now. So you've probably had to do for those of you who are doing that, you've probably had to do a little bit of adapting to be able to incorporate that into a quote count sheet, unquote, for a particular week, so that you have a summary of what came in your collection. And then, so if you've got folks who are doing that, and how's the money getting deposited? Is it getting deposited in a timely manner? Is it getting deposited by the same people who counted it or different people than the ones who counted it? And then, things like taking a look at who is it who's actually reconciling the bank statements. If you have one person who's doing all of these things, that's not good. And I know that that's an issue for a lot of our smaller congregations, but it is very important, to be able to to have at least some degree of division of duties so that you don't have the same person counting, who's depositing, who's then reconciling the bank statements. That's a very unsafe situation, not only for the church, but for the person who's actually doing it. And that's one of the things that often gets overlooked, is that these systems of internal control are just as much about protecting the person who's actually doing the transaction as it is about making sure, that there isn't opportunity for misappropriation or fraud to happen, because all it takes is, if you've got a person who's in that situation, all it takes is one unjustified accusation, against that person. But if they're doing everything, then there's nobody there to really kind of be their backup, and no opportunity to be able to say, well, no, this couldn't have happened because I gave it to this person who then did this. And so if there was some kind of a suspicion, about something going wrong, you don't have one person who is just standing there exposed with no backup there. So that's part of the reason why the division of duties is important. But again, going through things step by step through the transaction. So if you've got your counters doing what they're doing and they're handing it off to somebody who's actually doing the deposit, and then that person is bringing the deposit slip back, and the person who's actually posting the books is then posting that into the books. You're testing to see, what did the deposit slip say? What did the count sheet say? So, when you're looking at the count sheet, typically you might have things like maybe you have a memorial fund or a flower fund or an altar fund or, different places that some kinds of specialized donations go. So you can track that transaction and see if things are going to the proper accounts, and so once you get done that part, then you can again have that same kind of verification and that same kind of assuredness with your cash receipts as you had for your cash disbursements. And then payroll, again, whether it's an automated payroll service, whether you do your own payroll, tracking all of those transactions through to make sure things are being accurately reflected in all of the compensation areas of your revenue and expense report. So, when we're trying to do things virtually or with as little exposure for people to other people as possible, and as little exposure as possible to, mountains of paper. One of the things that you can do is, to make sure that when you're planning that part of your audit where you're actually doing the testing, that rather than, just kind of getting to the point where everybody's sitting in a room all together with boxes and boxes of papers, files from that particular year, having to go through and pull things, is that, you can use your automated records to literally be very selective about the paper that you actually have out for anybody to look at. And so if you're going through a list, for example, that you pull off of your computer from your cash receipts, your cash disbursements, and you're doing your random sampling from that list, rather than, you don't even have any boxes of files out yet. All your files are still, put away in their drawers. But you take your lists that you're running off of your accounting system, and it typically, I think a lot of us are familiar with the fact that we need to test about 10%, at least start there, testing 10% of the transactions that happened. So if you write 500 checks a year, you're gonna test 50 of them. If you write 200 checks a year, you're gonna test 20 of them. You can see that that's a lot less than having all of the records out there. You pick the transactions, that you need to test using whatever randomizing system that that you would normally use, but you just highlight them, for example, on that list. And then you have someone, and typically this would be somebody who's really familiar with the records, your treasurer, your bookkeeper, whoever that might be, who can then just go and find the documentation that pertains to those particular transactions. And you make that available to whoever it is that's going to audit them. And, depending upon, it is even possible, depending upon how comfortable you are in a particular, with scanning records, that you could actually just scan those and have them electronically available. As I mentioned 2 weeks ago when we first were talking about this, we've been doing the 2019 diocesan audit completely virtually. And so, the firm that we have that does our auditing, they have their own system that they use for us to be able to just upload files, so they did exactly for me what I was just talking about, which they said, first of all, we need your cash disbursements, your cash receipts, and your general ledger. And they used those reports once we sent them to them to pick which transactions that they wanted to test. And I'm here to tell you from our size, the number of transactions that we have that we go through, especially when you really kind of focus it on the what they call the material transactions, the ones that are large. We didn't have a lot of pulling of records to do, comparatively speaking, for the thousands of transactions that happen. And so then what Manny would do is he would go back, and Tanya, our controller would help him as well, go back into the files, pull the documentation, whether it was a deposit, a disbursement, whatever, and scan it. And then we would just take that and upload it to the accounting firm. And then if they had any other questions, or they decided they needed to test anything else a little further, they would come back to us with requests for that kind of stuff. But we literally did this without ever being in the same room together with them. We, just did it, by email and by doing the uploading that way. So, again, if you've got the capability to be able to do scanning easily, you could do this without ever being having people together in the same room touching paper. However, I'm very well aware that many, churches don't have that kind of capacity. But so what you can do is, even if you are still dealing with paper and having people needing to be somewhere where they can physically go through the paperwork, that, the sort of plan B would be to do the same approach and then have, one person be the one who goes in and pulls the records for particular transactions, perhaps sets them out on a table somewhere, and then isn't even present necessarily when the person who's doing the audit comes in to actually go through them with the checklists. So that is, that's another way that we can, that we can get those things taken care of in as safe a manner as possible. And if you have one person, who's coming in, again, if you have different people handling different parts of the audit, then perhaps you have the person who's handling the cash disbursements part of the audit come in at a different time than the person who's coming in to do the cash receipts part. And, that could be at a different time than the person who's coming in to handle the payroll part or going through the vestry minutes. So there's a number of, different ways that we can make that as safe as possible. And obviously, in that room where you have that kind of stuff going on, you've got people are coming in wearing masks and, gloves are a good idea, or just have a ton of hand sanitizer around. And again, if you're breaking this down to the point where the person who's coming in knows that they only have to spend like a couple of hours in there, literally just going through a very small, stack of papers that's on a desk and it's already been picked out for them, that also becomes a way to be able to, kind of ease your recruiting, and it could be, if you have that situation where, you need to have that person with the accounting expertise, who's helping the person who's in the room actually doing the testing part, because maybe the person isn't quite sure, what do I need to test and how do I need to do this? You could have the person with the accounting expertise, on the phone with them. You could have them doing Zoom together, or even in a lot of cases like that, if you needed to have them in the room together for a short period of time, it's usually possible within the room to be physically distanced, safely physically distanced, both people wearing masks, and perhaps wearing gloves as well, or again, just having a ton of, hand sanitizer around just to keep everybody safe. But if you needed, again, to have somebody there to guide the person who's doing the testing, there are very safe ways to do that as well. So that, those would be my recommendations as far as that's concerned. I also wanted to just take a moment to stop sharing this and go to one other screen. Here we go. Our website, so that we can take a look on our website. I don't know how many of you are familiar with where we keep all of our audit information, but if you go to this Congregations and Clergy dropdown, Resources, Documents, and Forms, and you click on there, and then we go down here to Resources for Churches, and click on there. There we go. And scroll down here to the Finance and Property Resources. Congregational Audits is right here. And there is some, right up here at the top is our forms. That's where all our forms live. There's some information down here, which a lot of this kind of is similar to what we just went through. It's just going through the whole list, really, of what I was just talking about. But what I wanted to focus on at the moment was just these forms that are here, because again, these are a lot of the checklists and that you would need to go through. So when you have your cash disbursements person, coming in, there's a checklist here. or not so much a checklist, but a worksheet for them to be able. Now, this is after you've already, from the cash disbursements list that we talked about before, there's already been that 10% of disbursements that's actually been chosen at random by the person who's leading the audit team. And so all of the, the little pile of papers is now out on the table. And so the person who's actually coming in to do the testing has this test sheet in front of them so that they can mark right down on the sheet, if they have, this first transaction is office, it's just an example of an office supplies purchase. And so they look at the bill and they're seeing that, and they're looking at the check, obviously, that was used to pay the bill. To match up the check, who was the check made out to, and does it match with the bill? How much was it? What was it for? What account number did it get charged to? What check number was it, and who was it approved by? If there was, what approval process, was there? How did that get handled? And so, again, this is a worksheet that just has space for a number of different transactions. And you see these, the letters up here in the parentheses. So they're even giving you instructions down at the bottom. This little letter A is per the invoice examined. And so what they're saying is take a look at the invoice, that's where this A is here. That you're actually looking at the invoice to see what does the invoice say about this transaction. And then for the small letter B, it's per the invoice, but it's traced to the cash disbursements journal. So again, when you have your little pile of papers that is there, and this is where your planning person comes in, very helpful, is that you also have, those reports that cash disbursements list that you originally pulled from. That report is also there so that the person who's looking at the paper can take a look at the invoice, and they can also match it up with what was, over on your cash disbursements journal. And then, you verify the amount that it's to the proper account. Now, when you have this little letter C, there you're looking, you can see here that you're examining the endorsed canceled check to make sure that it was payable to the proper payee. So here's where you're not just writing down the check number, you're also taking a look at the check to say if it was an Office Max bill, that the check was made out to Office Max. And then again, your approval procedures over here. So that's just kind of an example of how some of these, the checklists help to get you through what needs to be checked. So that was cash receipts or cash disbursements. We also have a similar one for cash receipts. And you'll note that it looks pretty, very, very similar here, and has notes down at the bottom as well. And so it's asking you here to take a look at, when the deposit slip you're looking at the deposit slip here to say how much was the amount, what was the date it was prepared, what was the date it went to the bank, and then what account was it distributed to. And the reason that you have all of these asterisks up here is because, it's giving you the opportunity to put in here what the account might be. Plate and Pledge might be one of them, Memorial Fund, Altar Guild, whatever. So that's why all of these are blank up here so that you can actually fill those things in. So that's the cash receipts one. Now, the other things that are important, you've got your, the audit program checklist here, which takes you through some of the, just the very basic general information that you need to have organized, and tells you a little bit about what kind of documents you should be looking to get together, for the audit itself. And then we've got the internal control questionnaire. And part of the reason that this one, is a bit longer, you can see that this is 7 pages long, is because it just takes you through the things that are considered to be best practices in every area that you're looking at, and this isn't, This one here isn't even as extensive as the one that some of the ones that I've seen for some of the larger churches. But these are just, again, your basic best practices that you want to make sure you have in place. And it's important that people, again, don't approach it from a sort of a let's just say, ain't no shame nor blame here when you're actually filling out this. It's important to just answer it honestly, because what it's intended to do is just point out places that are intended to be helpful moving forward. It's not, nobody is looking to punish anybody because something isn't being done exactly, the way that this is recommending that it be done. What it's meant to do is just to provoke thought. Okay, well, if we couldn't really honestly answer yes to any one of these questions, what could we perhaps do to make sure that the next time we answer this question, we could answer it yes? And so it is important to, to take time to go through this particular questionnaire. Sometimes, congregations actually have chosen to do this with their vestries. So the entire vestry is aware of, what the good financial practices are, and can help in the process. So again, it's, wow. It's, I have a visitor, so he wants to say hi. This is Ben, everybody. Can you see you? You're right up there. See? Okie doke. Thank you. So, again, that's the internal control questionnaire. There's another one that's called Statement of Internal Controls. This one also lots of people who are trying to plan audits find very helpful, the basic records checklist, so that you can get prepared. Again, the more prepared you are, and you can have these things just laid out for people, the easier it is to get in and out, really quickly, and to break things down into bite-sized chunks for people. And so I think that's really all I wanted to go over in detail. I want to stop now for a second and just ask if anybody has any questions.
No, I thank you. I think that's fairly clear. Was there one thing with this year, we actually have no real cash deposits in terms of no plate. So a lot of our things now, our income is all electronically. We scan the checks in. So we have a electronic record and images of all the checks. We get Belly and PayPal contributions. So we produce reports that way. So we're in better shape when we do the 2020 audit. We'll have pretty much all of the income records online. Now, I will say, breaking it up by week, we didn't transfer it to the weekly tally sheet. We look through the bank account. There's a weekly deposit that comes in, and when the deposit's made, we have the list of all the checks associated with that. And then the same thing with our credit card or PayPal receipts. They come in we do those reports every 2 weeks because we instead of get enough transactions to go up there, and then our automatic bank deposits, our bookkeeper does a monthly reconciliation of the books. So he's verifying that those are moved. She verifies they're in the books, and then we have actually our office manager actually post them to the individual's giving account. So we've got like two people that view every transaction that comes in electronically. One just records it in the bank account, and another one records it to the giver's donation account. They're two different systems. They're two different people who do those processes.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you brought that up, Jonathan, because that's the one part that is important. And a lot of times kind of gets overlooked when people are doing audits, is that when you're doing that cash receipts part of your auditing, not only are you auditing the fact you're assuring that it got posted to the right account in your revenue, you also are tracking that to the parishioner's giving statement at the same time, so that would be, again, when you're planning for the documentation that you need to have out there for someone who's going to be auditing cash receipts, you would also need to have, for the particular transactions that you're looking at, you would also need to have, the giving statements for the parishioner to be able to, track through to see that it was posted there, so that again, that when you're sending out your annual or quarterly or however frequently you do it, sending out your reports to your parishioners, that they're getting accurate reports of what their own particular giving is. And so that is important too. And I did see that, Wendy, that you asked about making this information available, that, after the meeting. Yeah, I am going to have Steve, we are being recorded, so I'm going to have Steve, put this up on YouTube, so that it'll be available afterwards. All the checklists and everything, as I said, I saw that again, that James put the link to that place, that when I took you through the menu of the diocesan website, James just went straight to the address there. So
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah.
So that's there. And so yeah, any other questions, any challenges anybody is having in particular that we didn't address with what we were talking about here tonight? All righty.
But I did have one thing about posting, like the slides from this sessions. I couldn't find those in the COVID one. I saw all of the other groups, the other task force one, but I couldn't find the ones that for the financial resources one that meets Mondays. I couldn't find where
the recordings are. Yeah, because sometimes I don't even have slides. Sometimes I guess I did last time too, didn't I? Yeah. And I do remember that I had Steve do the recording for that one. So I'll check with him and find out if he just got held up. I know he's been really busy with convention, trying to get.
It may have been I was looking for the slides posted, but I did see. I pretty much saw a lot from the other one, the plate and the stewardship. I found all the material for that one. I just couldn't find, because the last time we went through the PPP short form,
right.
Review those, and I couldn't find that presentation.
Yeah, I'll check it. I'll check in, because if he for some reason, maybe it slipped through the cracks with him as he was trying to get all of the prep work done for convention. So if it's not up there now, I'll make sure it gets up within the next day or so. Anne, go ahead.
I want to thank you very much. I've been doing this for 5 years, but the audit has always been something that happened in the back room. And I know, as you've said, the treasurer shouldn't be actively involved. That's on purpose. And our office manager would supply all the papers to the auditors. But thank you so much, because this has made it a heck of a lot clearer as to what's going on.
Good. I'm glad. And it is important, for the treasurer to have that sense of clarity around it, because again, your treasurer is the one who's providing the records, and in many cases being that person that James talked about, who is guiding the outside CPA or whoever, through the records, and, answering questions about internal controls, things like that. So it is important for treasurers to really have a good understanding of what audit processes are about.
Also, Phyllis, can I ask Jonathan Gloucester which Christ Church he is from? And would it be possible to get in touch with you? Because there are people in our parish that would like us to go to some means of electronic giving, and I need to work that out. And you said you're all electronic giving.
Yeah, I'm at Christ Church, New Brunswick.
New Brunswick. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, we've we've encouraged our givers, especially with COVID-19. We did have some people who paid their pledges in cash, and that was the one challenge, is counting those. But now we've even converted those to either send it through the mail, through their bank, or do something. So we haven't had a physical cash receipt deposit since March.
Wow. So can I get your number through somewhere?
Yeah, you can. I'll chat my email in the chat list.
Terrific. Thank you. Good.
Yeah, thanks very much for that. And again, that's you can kind of tell that the more you can get into doing electronic giving, there are a number of internal control issues that you circumvent, by not having to handle cash, not having to worry about what happens to the money after it comes in. Does it get deposited right away? If not, where does it stay while it's waiting to be deposited? So it's in a safe place. You don't have to worry about any of that stuff to the extent that you can actually do electronic giving. So there are a number of advantages, to trying to get it as much, headed that way as possible. So yeah, thank you very much, Jonathan. So I can see that his information is up there, and I appreciate you making yourself available for that. Thanks. Any other?
It also helps if you do credit cards that you do with a credit card provider, and they help hold all the credit card information.
Yes.
So you don't hold the credit card information because of the liability of credit card theft.
Mm-hmm.
You have to sign the documents and make sure that the documents are filled out, but you don't touch the credit card numbers.
Right.
So your third party does that.
Yeah, all those numbers are stored on the third-party credit card provider's website. They're not on your computer anywhere. They're not accessible through your computers anywhere. So that does take another huge headache off.
Yeah, we don't see bank account information but we do. Even the checks we receive in the mail, because some people do online payment with checks, we actually have a scanner where we scan and send those right into the bank to be deposited. So we only have like the records for a while, but there's an electronic image because I'm not there counting, but I can see every week the electronic image of every check that came in and was deposited. Just by going online to our bank, I can review that without having to physically look at the paper checks. And then if they're an issue where it should be recorded, then I can work that virtually really over the phone line. Say, yeah, this person's check should be recorded under this account or something like that.
Yep. Yeah, the exchange of information, again, electronically, it's just so much easier.
You are light years ahead of us.
No, we're only about 2 or 3 years into this now. 4 or 5 years ago, we were a long ways away from this. We had like 2 PayPal transactions a year. Now we built that up to something significant. Yeah.
How many people do you have contributing? Roughly.
I'd say I have like 93 pledge units, but we also have maybe another on a weekly basis, 10 or 15 people who give or various, they aren't pledgers, but they're regular givers. And so, I mean, in the course of a year, we have well over 100 or so folks who make contributions. And like now I say, they're even the ones that are mailed in, checks sent in through the mail, we quickly scan them and turn them into electronic documents. So we're now being able to record all of our, now that we're reopening, we may get a few more cash ones, but we're strongly discouraging cash, putting cash in the plate. Just if anything for safety health reasons, it's like, don't put cash in the plate. And that saves me having to worry about getting counters to count cash at the church again, because that was, even though we didn't have a lot, that was our biggest challenge, as Phyllis said, is counting the cash and keeping records of that. It was the counters, it was their most painstaking thing they hated to do, was keep track those cash donations.
Yep. And, there again, like I say, in a lot of our smaller congregations, I'm well aware that oftentimes they have a hard time getting, 2 sets of 2 unrelated people to count, week after week after week after week. So, or you're stuck in a position where you've got the same people who are counting, who are depositing, and sometimes even, have something to do with working with the bank statements, and that just puts people in a really, potentially bad situation. So the more that we can get coming in electronically, now you'll see when you take a look at the internal control, worksheets, that there are also certain internal controls that you need to make sure that you set up for electronic transactions. So that you can safeguard what's happening there also. But when you've got stuff that, people are sending you, through your bank, You know, it's really, you know, it really does sort of take it to an arm's length, you know, from actually just having to handle, you know, the cash all the time. So it definitely does streamline, you know, a lot of different things. All righty. Well, thank you all very much for, you know, your participation, again, for the sharing. It's been awesome. And you know, I hope there's been some helpful information out there for lots of people. If there is anything else that, you know, about this that you need to catch up with me about, you know, please feel free to do so. And we will see you again in a couple of weeks. One of the things that, again, came up in our earlier meeting that people were interested in also was to talk about, you know, start sharing with each other a little bit more about some of the accounting systems that were used. And we actually had a couple of folks on the morning call that are still using manual systems. And we're really trying to get to the point where everybody can be on an automated system and something that's more than just spreadsheets, something that's considered a comprehensive system of accounting, like QuickBooks or Realm, or, you know, even, you know, I know there were still, I think, some churches that are using Church Windows, but something that is, you know, that's literally helping you with the double entry, you know, bookkeeping side of accounting. Rather than just doing spreadsheets. So I think that may be, and I'm not sure if that'll be in 2 weeks, but that would be, you know, another thing I think we'll kind of do is take a review of what some folks are using, what's good about it, what's challenging about it, and again, kind of provide a little bit more of a basis for sharing with each other, you know, how we're handling those different things. So yeah, Anne, go ahead.
Our regular CPA, the everyday guy, handles all the stuff using QuickBooks. It is all on his computer. What we are doing are basically manual feeds and manual reports from him. And I'm wondering if anybody else has a system where they're somehow tapping into the electronic work being done at an accountant's office.
Well, the one thing I could say from my own experience is that there are a number of congregations who are using QuickBooks online, not on, you know, not in an office anywhere, and they've added me as a user on their account, so that, you know, and these are congregations where I've been actually actively assisting them with questions. Maybe I'm training a bookkeeper, maybe I'm, you know, doing something like that, so that literally I can be sitting at my computer accessing their records at the same time they are. I'm seeing exactly the same thing on the screen that the person I'm talking with is looking at. And I can, you know, just literally walk them through how to move through and do the different things that they need to do. So that's, you know, one thing. And ACS Realm is another online system. So, you know, any of the systems that are subscription service online, you know, in the cloud types of systems, that is one of the benefits that they offer to be able to work together with that. I don't know if anybody else has anything they wanted to add.
Yeah. We moved from QuickBooks, like on a computer in the church, to an online one. It saved a lot of time, especially since the treasurer, like I was treasurer then. Well, I wasn't during the week. I don't even work in the state. I was spending a lot of time on weekends at night going down to the church to look at things. And then once we were able to virtualize it, it allowed questions could be answered fairly quickly. You could say online or over the phone. We could share and say, okay, what about this transaction? I'd say the biggest thing, next step for us, is going to be the invoices we get in the mail from our vendors, is getting all those. We're not yet electronic on those, like you say, scanning, getting the process. We can get those in and scanned directly into the system. Then everything would be really easy after that. Like we said, the audits and tasks, we could just link that invoice to a transaction and have them all together. That'd be my next step, is getting it directly linked. So if I get a bill from the electric company, we're not doing online billing from them yet, and then I could just link it to the bill in my accounting system. Then I have a lot of the linkage, and then we could eliminate a lot of the paper, because paper, the old time accounting, that was what you relied on. Now it's just,
Too cumbersome.
we had an issue about where to store and when to go and develop policies on destruction of records and all, so that we just didn't have, it was just getting too cluttered with so much in there. So we went through a process of when we were going to destroy these paper records. Our payroll is online now too. We use the payroll system. So even though they will send us some records, but we try to keep most of those payroll records online, so they're easy to reconcile.
Yep, and I am aware of one congregation that experienced a tremendous amount of damage from Superstorm Sandy, and they had one year where, I mean, their records were just destroyed. Their paper records were just destroyed, and so there's, when that's all you have, there's really no way to recover, from that.
Yeah, that prompted us to change too, because they weren't damaged, but the records were down in the basement. Luckily, the areas where the financial records were didn't get flooded, but other areas got flooded. So we sort of worried then after that about being able to keep a reduced amount of records. We actually had have a museum archivist in our congregation who advised us on
That's great.
on processes and things like that.
That's great. I actually may tap you for that person at some point in time. We had somebody who's working with us at Diocesan House, and she's no longer able to do that. So I may try to see if your person might be. And I mean, it was somebody that we paid to do that, but she just wasn't able to continue for health reasons. So we actually have a very good system set up. She got us. She was actually a archivist for the military, and I mean, this woman, she had this system down, so we have the system all set up, but we just need for somebody to come in and kind of help us from time to time on literally getting it, doing some of the purges and things, but yeah, so that'll be, some of the stuff that we'll be talking about in future sessions. And so we'll be, again, not next Monday, but the Monday after that. I will see you back at the same time. It's great to see you tonight.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Phyllis. This was great. This helped me a lot.
I'm glad. So
'Cause I'm the dummy.
glad you could be here. So let's go ahead. I'll go ahead and close this out with a prayer. The Lord be with you.
Also with you.
Let us pray. Gracious and loving God, we thank you for today. We thank you for the beauty of the day. And we thank you for all of the gifts and the talents and the dedication and faithfulness all across our diocese, really, but just especially for everybody on our call tonight who really work so hard to do the best we can to create the kind of trust in the kind of environment, really, of trust around our record keeping and around our stewardship of all that you give us to take care of. And we ask that you would continue to be with us as we continue to try to make improvements. Give us inspiration and creativity to be able to think of even new and better ways, especially confronted by the challenges of our environment these days. We also ask for added measures of your grace and your peace through tomorrow, especially, and through the days that will follow it. We ask for a spirit of forbearance and charity among all of those who are going through this election season. We ask that you keep us all safe and that you guide us and keep us remembering that the one to whom we are responsible is Lord over all elections. And we ask all of this in the name and in the strength of Jesus Christ, our Lord and Savior. Amen.
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 Right.
Thank you.
Take care, everybody.